Good morning and welcome to the Eastern Nation, your trusted source for Africa's latest updates in diplomacy, development, and regional affairs. What if a nation's greatest vulnerability was not something it lost by accident, but something taken from it deliberately, over time, through deception, silence, and division? This is the question Major General Teshome Jameshu places before Ethiopians when he speaks about the Red Sea, not as a distant body of water, but as a central chapter of Ethiopia's unfinished story. He begins with an assertion that leaves little room for debate. Ethiopia's historical presence along the Red Sea is not a claim that needs discovery, justification, or excessive evidence. It is a fact so established, he says, that even the sun has warmed it. From the moment Ethiopia emerged as a state, it did so with access to the sea. The sea was not an addition to Ethiopia's identity, it was part of its foundation. Ethiopians lived with it, traded through it, defended it, and breathed with it. For this reason, Major General Teshome argues that Ethiopia does not need to plead its case before the world. This is not a narrative constructed for international sympathy. It is an internal truth, one that every Ethiopian, especially those who speak on national platforms, must first accept, internalize, and defend. Only then can Ethiopia present itself confidently on the global stage. History, he insists, is not something to be negotiated away. But the story does not end with shared origins. The harder question follows: if Ethiopia and the sea were once inseparable, how did they become divided? According to Major General Teshome, this separation was not natural, nor inevitable. It was the result of calculated plots by Ethiopia's historical enemies, forces that understood the strategic value of isolating the country from maritime access. These enemies did not always act directly. Instead, they exploited moments of weakness, internal disagreement, and political short-sightedness. Over time, Ethiopia was pushed away from an asset that was essential to its security, economy, and future. Yet he is careful and blunt in assigning responsibility. While historical enemies played a decisive role, they were enabled by internal actors. Domestic groups, blinded by narrow agendas and short-term interests, failed to protect what he calls a national issue of existence. In moments when unity was required, fragmentation prevailed. In moments when honor and foresight were essential, compromise and betrayal took their place. As a result, Ethiopia's adversaries found willing tools, and the sea gate slipped further out of reach. This, he stresses, is a lesson the younger generation must understand clearly. Not to inherit resentment, but to inherit awareness. A nation that does not understand how it was weakened is destined to repeat the same mistakes. The cost of silence, Major General Teshome warns, has been enormous. By failing to address the sea gate issue decisively, Ethiopia increased its vulnerability economically, strategically, and politically. The scars of this loss are not abstract. They are visible in livelihoods constrained by logistics, in youth whose opportunities are limited, and in a country forced to rely on others for access to global trade. These scars, he says, are still heavy, and they continue to weigh on national unity. This is why he frames the recovery of the sea gate not as nostalgia, but as responsibility. It is a message to the present generation so that future generations do not inherit another wound. In his words, the sea gate is Adwa for our Ethiopia, a symbol of dignity, resistance, and national resolve. To speak of reclaiming it is not to call for chaos or confusion, but to reaffirm a shared national agenda. That agenda, he emphasizes, must stand above political divisions, ethnic debates, or ideological disputes. The question of maritime access is not partisan. It is not regional. It is not temporary. It is a national issue, and anyone attempting to dilute it with side arguments must be challenged. Ethiopians, he urges, must debate this as one people, with clarity and unity. Scholars may differ on how many national interests a state has, 6, 7, or 9, but on this point, Major General Teshome is unequivocal: access to a seaport is a survival interest. Survival, in this sense, is not theoretical. It reaches into every home: farmers seeking markets, merchants moving goods, students imagining futures, youth searching for opportunity. It belongs to everyone. Because the current generation carries the burden of past decisions, it also carries a duty to ensure that future generations do not bear the same weight. Unity, focus, and resolve are no longer optional. Especially now, he notes, as global dynamics shift and Ethiopia finds that it is not as isolated as it once believed. His message, at its core, is both a warning and a call to action. History has already been spoken. The question is whether Ethiopians are ready to listen and to act together before silence leaves another scar. Can you believe that the most important battle for Ethiopia's future is not being fought with weapons, but with vision, unity, and generational resolve? This was the central question echoing through Addis Ababa as policymakers, youth leaders, and scholars gathered to discuss one issue they agree can no longer be postponed: Ethiopia's access to the sea. For Women and Social Affairs State Minister Muna Ahmed, the matter is clear and uncompromising. Sea access, she says, is not a luxury, not a diplomatic preference, and not merely a geographic concern. It is an existential issue, a matter of survival. Speaking to a national youth forum, Muna framed the moment as historic, not only for the country, but for the generation now coming of age. Ethiopia, she argued, is standing at a decisive chapter in its long history. And the youth are not spectators in this chapter, they are authors. The Red Sea, in her view, represents far more than water and coastline. It represents opportunity. Trade routes that lower costs and expand markets. Industrial growth that creates jobs. Technological exchange that connects Ethiopia to global innovation. With sea access, the economy breathes more freely. Without it, development remains constrained by dependency and vulnerability. But the impact goes beyond economics. Muna emphasized that securing access to the sea strengthens Ethiopia's foreign relations, deepens people-to-people ties, and enhances regional and continental integration. In a region as interconnected and volatile as the Horn of Africa, maritime access is not only about prosperity, it is about influence, stability, and dignity. For this reason, she rejected the idea that sea access is solely a government agenda. That framing, she said, must be corrected. This is an intergenerational issue. It belongs to farmers and merchants, students and professionals, women and men, today's citizens and tomorrow's. And above all, it belongs to the youth, who make up more than 70% of the population and will live longest with the consequences of success or failure. Her message was both empowering and demanding. Awareness must be built, unity must be forged, and action must be coordinated across society. Only through synergy of voices, institutions, and generations can Ethiopia write what she called its next golden history. That sentiment was echoed by Ethiopian Youth Federation President Terkekan Abdujabbar, who made it clear that for Ethiopian youth, sea access is not a secondary concern. It is the primary agenda. He reaffirmed the Federation's commitment to mobilizing young people nationwide, transforming demographic strength into strategic purpose. Yet this national conversation does not stop at Addis Ababa. Scholars observing Ethiopia's diplomatic push argue that the quest for sea access is not only justified, it is rational, strategic, and stabilizing for the wider region. According to these scholars, Ethiopia is navigating one of the most complex geopolitical environments in the world. The Horn of Africa sits at the crossroads of global trade and great power competition, particularly along the Red Sea corridor. For decades, Ethiopia has been forced into the role of an observer along a maritime route that directly affects its security and economy. The current effort, they say, is about correcting that historical imbalance. This is not a short-term maneuver, but a long-term strategic vision designed to protect the interests of both present and future generations. And increasingly, these efforts are gaining recognition within the international community as measured, lawful, and forward-looking. Historian and cultural scholar Ahmed Zekaria placed the issue within a deeper historical frame. Ethiopia's national honor, he argued, is inseparable from two lifelines, the Red Sea and the Arbari River. These are not optional development pathways, they are foundational to the country's sovereignty and survival. Only 3 decades ago, he noted, Ethiopia possessed its own natural and historical gateways to the sea. What is happening today should not be mischaracterized as expansionism or provocation. It is, in his words, a righteous effort to correct historical distortions and reclaim what was once organically part of the nation's strategic space. More importantly, Ahmed emphasized that Ethiopia's sea access would not destabilize the region. On the contrary, it could become a catalyst for shared growth and mutual advancement across East Africa, unlocking trade, connectivity, and cooperation. That view was reinforced by Tawfiq Abdullahi, member of the House of People's Representatives and former ambassador to Yemen. He described Ethiopia's separation from its coastline as a regrettable chapter, one marked by missed opportunities and geopolitical miscalculations. Today, he said, the country's diplomatic push has reached a decisive stage. The stakes are high. The East African coast and the Red Sea are becoming ever more central to global commerce. Ethiopia's inclusion as a sovereign maritime actor, Tawfiq argued, would serve as a pillar of regional tranquility, not a source of conflict. He was particularly emphatic about Assab, which he described as Ethiopia's legal, historical, and natural port. Efforts related to Assab, he said, must be pursued with renewed focus and national unity. His closing call was direct: this is a generational quest, and it demands collective responsibility. Governments may negotiate, diplomats may engage, but nations succeed only when their people stand together behind a shared strategic vision. In the end, the message from policymakers, youth leaders, and scholars converges on a single point: Ethiopia's future is inseparable from the sea. The question is no longer whether this matters, but whether this generation will rise to meet the moment history has placed before it. Thank you for watching.